Welcome back to Testa Tuesday Tips. Still coming here from the Sacramento show, cat show. And again, talking about you never know who you're going to meet. With Rick Krane. Needs no introduction in the taxidermy world, especially the world of fish. Then you all know Jeff, aka Goldfish, aka Chumley, aka Dingo Dave, and his newest one, aka Dinger. And what we're going to do is give you a little example. We've been talking through these different videos about competing, getting your work judged, and the critique part, which is how you're going to improve your work. So I'm going to step back and let Rick Krane beat the crap out of Jeff here in a little... Nah, just kidding.
Does he have to go back to work on Monday?
No.
Okay.
No, he doesn't.
He's mine.
He's Rick's. And any of you don't know, if you don't know who Rick is, look him up. What you've seen his work, any taxidermist, like he needs no introduction. All right. I'm going to step out and let you guys go at it.
All right, Chuck. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jeff, the first thing that we want to look at when we're looking to critique the fish is what have you done right? Because it's just as important to look at what you've done right as well as where you need improvement. Oftentimes when we do things, we're not sure just because of where our experience level is it correct or isn't it correct? And that's one of the reasons why we come to shows like this, and this is why we associate with one another so we can learn things. If your hands aren't touching something through experience, books are great, videos are great, but you're not going to learn it unless you do it, okay? As a judge myself, I break things down into regions, and I treat the head as one region, I treat all the fins or the appendages as one region, and I treat the body as one region. If you make the fish absent of color right now, what I'm going to look at is the anatomy of what's going on here. So obviously a fish is dead, that's why we end up with it, okay? And what our job is to try to make it as lifelike as possible.
Exactly.
Okay? So the preservation of fauna, or the historical preservation of fauna, is what's done in the museums. What we do is we work for the general public and clients, or we do work for ourselves. So our job is to take something that's not going to evolve in your lifetime and study it as much as possible to try to replicate what we see as the essence of the fish or the signatures of the fish. And that would apply to birds, deer heads, mammals, so on and so forth. So when we look at this fish right here, we know it's a lingcod because we have enough information. You can Google lingcod and come up with enough pictures here. And this is a particular species that has many different variations of color. So when I look at the color here, I may say, well, does this fit within the color range? And I would say, yes, it does. An acceptable color values and patterns and hues that, yeah, it works with it. So now that I know that we're not at a real beginner's level where we didn't get the color right, we're going to move right over to the anatomy of this fish. Now this is a replica or a reproduction fish, so either a company or the individual, themselves has taken a fish and they've molded the fish doing different types of methodology of molding to create the reproduction of this fish. The issue always comes into play with competitions is that we use a score sheet. Let me see your score sheet for a minute. And basically there's several sections of this particular score sheet. Different score sheets, different criterias, but for the most part what people focus on is this little 20% area, which is the painting. But if you really want to win a first place ribbon, and if you really want to impress me, you better focus on the other 80% of this, which is the anatomy, the craftsmanship, and the mechanical soundness of your skills. That's what you have to do. So we use these score sheets as a guideline to look at different areas and different situations that are on here to determine whether they're correct or they're not correct. 28 years ago, when I first started judging, we would bring stacks and stacks of books, plaster cast, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. I'm from New Hampshire, over New England, that's where Angler's Artistry is. And what we have going on over there is the same situation you have going over here. You have taxidermy associations, you have people like me that come to judge, but today we can get on a plane, we can bring a computer, We can bring several hard drives with us, and we have all the reference material that we need. Where years ago, I couldn't have come to California because I couldn't do my job, and that's to help you do better work. Okay, so I require reference material and information to help you do your job. So the first thing that I look at here is we'll start with the head. This particular head is a little bit on what I call the rough side because it has lots of what are known as dead features still in the fish. How do we know that? When we look at bone plates and we start to see shrinkage in here, we know that the tissue structure is no longer full. And if the tissue structure isn't full, it's anatomically not accurate. So if that's wrong, I'm going to start looking at all the different bone structures in the head. Because if this was missed, that tells me that you're at a place now that when you purchased this, you didn't have that information in your repertoire, your toolbox, to say, I know that's incorrect, so I have to fix that. Okay? So that's one of the first areas that I'm going to help you with, is when we're identifying different regions of the anatomy. So we have a head, and we can literally break down all the different areas in the head, and we can start looking at using reference, because we judge on reference, not preference. My opinion is wonderful, but if I can't tell you why my opinion is what it is, you may not learn anything. If I tell you how something is done, you may remember it, but if I tell you why it's done, you will remember it. Okay? So when we start looking at things, I may mention to you what the actual biological or anatomical name for something is, and I may talk about what the process is. What does it do? How does it relate to the fish? Oftentimes, when we mold and cast things, it's very static, very dead looking. So we take the dead fish, we try to make as many improvements as we can before we mold it, either injecting tissue or coming inside internally to the cavity, filling things out, and then molding it. And at that point, we mold that fish. In this case, this fish is molded with some dead features in it. So as the taxidermist competing here, I want to see you in the future look at those areas and rebuild those areas accurately. Okay? So when we look at other areas of the fish, sometimes when a fish is frozen, areas expand, because at 32 degrees, water expands. There's water in the tissue, so it's going to expand. So in this particular case, sure, there's a lot of meat here in the cheek, but see how there's a distension and the bone plate's actually lifted up from here? That tells me that it was molded frozen and that there's a distortion in the head. Now that would require you in some cases to come in here and grind that information out and make the information correct, meaning that you would have to rebuild it. Okay? So as we start looking at the entire head, one of the most important focal points is always the eye. You know, it's written that, you know, the soul of life is through the eye. And when we look at an eye, we can tell if something's living or not living. Well, in this particular case, there's a structure that makes the shape of that eye correct. So what I see here is I see an eye that I would look at the size of it, I would look at the color of it, and I would look at the shape of it to see if it's functioning correctly. So the size is okay, the color is not correct, okay, and the sclera, the part of the anatomy around the eye, is also not correct. So we would have to look at why we did that. So I would engage you in conversation and tell me, you know, I would ask the question, tell me about your methodology, tell me about how you do this. And then you would explain to me how you would do this, and then at that point we can talk from your experience, not just mine. Because I may tell you how I do it, and you may not understand anything I'm telling you. So we want to do that as good judges. That's one of the things we want to do. Once we move past the head, we would move on to the appendages or the fins. So we would look at fin butt attachments, we would look at if there's shrinkage, if something's lifelike. One of the most common and simple things that you can do is that you can put movement into a fin. If a fish is static in the water or it's swimming, because of what is known as hydrodynamic pressure, that's the pressure of water. When you put your hand in water, it wants to float back up. What taxidermists do is they open up fins like they're wings. Birds require lift, airplanes require lift. That's aerodynamics. Fish are hydrodynamic, so the fins will move in a serpentine, a figure-8 movement, and that's the easiest, simplest way for them to work through the water. 30 years ago, my background is a fisheries biologist. That's what I went to college for, and that's what I did. I worked at a hatchery, and we raised fish. So I had a great opportunity to not just look at the outside of them, but know what's going on the inside of them and what they do. And eventually, if you study enough things, you'll realize that there's very common things or a common thread that goes on with things. If fish are static or they're moving, you will see a figure eight. I bring hundreds of hours of underwater film footage with me when we come to the shows, and we'll open this up, we'll take a look at this, and we'll spend 15 minutes or so studying what goes on underwater. I've spent over 30 years acquiring, with my own photography work, live reference photos. I don't take dead reference photos unless I wanted to reproduce something that had a dead feature, so we work from something live. Then we come back to the body once we're done with the fins. The molding process is very difficult for a big long fish like this, especially a soft-scaled fish like this. Some fish like bluegills or crappies have hard scales, so they're a little more forgiving shape-wise when you mold them. But when you have long, soft scales like this on a fish that's of this length, very difficult to do. So oftentimes, this is known as the visceral cavity, or what we think is the belly of the fish. That's where the internal organs, the kidneys, the air bladder, the stomach, so on and so forth are. And that is usually filled. That cavity is filled, and then it's laid down in a bedding material and it's molded. Oftentimes what you end up with is flat spots because the fish resides or rests in that bedding material, and then it creates distortions on the other side of the fish. This particular fish has several distortions in it that is not pleasing to the eye as far as what that fish would look like in a live situation. So when we're first learning taxidermy, oftentimes we're going to buy reproductions. But from a competition point of view or perspective, at some point we want to progress and we want to learn how to mold and cast our own specimens. But this is just an excellent opportunity for you to come here and spend some time and get your critique, which is what you've done. And this way, you're going to know what you do well and also where you need a little bit of improvement. We would dialogue a little bit. We would talk about what you want to know as far as information. And then again, we would come back to this information. And my job is an interpreter. That's basically what it is. I try to speak fish anatomy. That's what I try to do. And if you're going to do any of the disciplines of taxidermy, birds, mammals, whatever it may be, fish, you have to know that your journey is never a destination. Every day you're going to learn something. Every day, hopefully, you're going to put the effort forward to say, hey, this is what I need to practice on. This is what I need to work on. And if you can do that for sure, you're going to get there. Look, I gave you a second place ribbon on here because you have far more things correct than not correct. There's a limitation to what you can fix on somebody else's reproduction, but I see that you've made some attempts to do that, and I want to reward you for that and not punish you for that. My philosophy is I start everybody at an 80, and I'll give you some points, and I may take some points away. If I start you at 100, then you're already on the downward slide, and it's not a positive experience. Look, we want everybody to come back to the taxidermy shows, because when you connect art with nature, I mean, how much more beautiful of God's work is that? That's how I look at it. So you've done an excellent job here. I expect to see better work in the future, and I expect to see work done that is not the same work that I'm seeing here. Okay? So you are going to have to get with Chuck, and Chuck is going to work with you on how to improve some of these disciplines. Okay? I thank you very much for your time. And Chuck, thank you for your time.
No, and Rick, thanks for giving us the opportunity to make a video to show people out there in YouTube land, and even people that aren't taxidermists,
Sure.
about what judges expect. And you're right, I'll get a big 2x4 and keep beating on Jeff all the way till we either come to your place or come out next year.
Listen, if that's what it takes, you're a committed man.
Yes, I am. And thanks for tuning in to Testa's Tuesday Tips. We'll see you next time.